Welcome, guys. Fitness. That's what we're talking today. The fitness industry, man, we've been bombarded for decades now with information coming in, coming at us. And, sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes maybe it's not so helpful. And there's really this dichotomy. There's this sense of it's this or that. It's if I'm walking or am I running? Am I strength training or am I doing cardio? When it comes to nutrition, am I going vegan or am I going carnivore? Such an extreme going on. And it really brings up more questions than it does give answers. And it really is getting everybody to a point that instead of following in, they're throwing their hands up and saying, forget it, which is the reason that we've got 88% of Americans that have metabolic disorder and all sorts of problems. So rather than going down this list of problems, I tend to try to be solutions oriented. And with that, I brought you a guest today that I think is really going to help shine some light on this and bring some clarity to it. So that being said, guys, welcome back. Coach's Corner. I'm Jeffrey David Hartford. And today I have a guest for you that is really going to blow your socks off. My friend, Zane Griggs. Welcome to the show, my man.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate it. Thanks for asking me on.
Absolutely. Truly my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this. And guys, listen, Zane and I just had an opportunity. It might have been almost a full half hour of chatting before we hit record, partially because technology wasn't on our side, but it gave us the opportunity to get chatting a little bit more and get some real good energy going. And really, today's going to be an absolute blessing for us. So all that being said, Zane, when I go on, I Google your name, I'm seeing something that really jumped out at me. The things that I'm seeing is it's the health and wellness, but it's also about insulin sensitivity. It's about longevity, and it's about building this lean body in only 3 to 4 hours of training per week. And that's exactly the type of simplicity that I like to preach and really get people to understand. So all that being said, tell us a little about yourself. I know you've been in the industry for a while, such as I, and give us your background.
I have. I've been a trainer for about 24 years, quite a while. And just, really out of passion, basically out of personal interest in, not so much because I was into athletics or anything, but really out of health, longevity. Those were my driving factors, more so than just a love of sports, for instance. And so looking at that drove me to kind of look more into nutrition, but the biochemistry, kind of dig deeper. It's like, well, what's really making these things work? Or not work in most cases for a lot of people, because the standard guidelines, the recommendations, the textbook stuff that we were supposed to learn and then pass on to with our clients wasn't working. It just wasn't effective. And there weren't a lot of answers out there in the mainstreams. You have to dig a little deeper. You start looking at especially back then. There wasn't much internet access to stuff like blogs. There was no social media at that point when I started. So it was like trial and error, reading books, and then eventually blogs and all that. But it was really a lot of trial and error. And with me being the number one guinea pig, okay, let me try this, let me try that. Or my wife, she's try this as she's having kids. Like, well, okay, there's a trial for weight loss. It's like post-baby weight loss stuff. And so that took me down the road of the reason I could say 3 to 4 hours a day of training is because the focus I found really should be on how we're eating and some other factors, sleep, and meal timing, meal frequency, that kind of thing. Not just what we're eating, but how often and when, and just really trying to figure out, I don't say there's a magic formula, but what generally works for most people. What would generally help most people to reverse disease, not a healthy body, because most of the studies like you and I read or see, a lot of times they're done in college kids, or they're done in people who had been training, they're trained people, they're athletes, they're volunteered for something. What reverses disease? What reverses metabolic disease? What is going to get someone who needs to lose 40 or 50 or 100 pounds to lose weight and reverse insulin resistance? Or reverse type 2 diabetes, for that matter, and reduce and put some more years at the end of their life and make those years more pleasurable, more beneficial, and make them healthier. So that really drove me to keep digging in and experimenting and and finding what works. And it wasn't multiple 10, 12 hours a week of exercise, because that's just going to wear most, especially as you get older, that's going to wear you out physically.
Yep.
And lead to injuries. And so it made me dig into the biochemistry. How do our bodies respond to food? What's out there that's could be triggering this disease? What's so different now that we weren't eating, what wasn't part of our diet 150 years ago, before we had type 2 diabetes, heart disease, obesity being so prevalent? Obesity was less than 1% of the population before 1900. Type 2 diabetes was almost unheard of. Heart disease was, again, also almost unheard of until about 1912 was the first paper written on heart disease. And now it's the number one killer of men. And 42% of our population is obese, not just overweight, but obese, 50% by 2030. Something's changed. Something's changed in our food matrix and what we're eating. And I wanted to dig deep to find out what that was. And sometimes you just, you try things, you learn, you say, okay, could be this, could be that, knowing could be more than one variable. But that's what drives me. That's what drives me. And to let people know,
Yeah, I love it. I'm 100% with you. And it's interesting. I mean, I'm at the point now personally, and that's why I love these kinds of conversations, is we can put it out there and we can share the knowledge that we've gained with an audience that's looking for the same answers. And, with the experience that you and I have in here, we do have some answers now, and some of it's still anecdotal. Some of it's pretty tried and true and pretty solid. But, reading books out there, as you were talking, what came to mind there is something I heard from Dr. Robert Lustig. Is ultimately, he's narrowed it down to simply, the problem is either we have too much of something we do not need, or we don't have enough of something we do need. And now it's just a matter of figure it out. What is it? Right? So to your point with the nutrition, listen, when it comes down to it, it's let's get some more whole foods. Let's eliminate the processed foods. Let's stop overthinking it and complicating it.
Right.
And let's start there, right? Let's little bit of changes like that, right? So that being said, I know that the big three pillars that we've chatted about that you've got, it's nutrition, exercise, and I'll say sleep too is another one of the big ones for you. So as we look at those things, I know you have narrowed down the exercise component from the standpoint of changing the physique and getting that lean muscular physique, only needing the 3 to 4 hours a week of that strength training and that stimulus, but staying on the nutrition. I know you do some coaching, but are there some principles that you can share with people today that you want to give some pointers and they can walk away from today with?
Oh, absolutely. There's some really significant, say toxins, if you want to call it that, only because of the level that they've entered our system. But they're part of our food system, and they've increased in our food system over the last, I'd say greatly over the last 70 years, but really over the last 110, 120 or so years, that weren't there before, or weren't there to the degree that they're there. And so, I think correlates pretty well if you put them on a timeline with the level of disease and the increase of metabolic disease in our population. The one everyone knows about and pretty much acknowledges at this point, I think, is sugar. And we've seen a great increase. I don't mean from eating a piece of fruit. I mean where you either have liquid sugar or you have added high fructose corn syrup. You have added sugars to things where you wouldn't expect fine sugar, like in bread or in your salad dressing or where it's just pervasive and you're eating it without realizing someone's put it in there. And that's Robert Lustig's, I think, biggest point. You mentioned Robert Lustig. That was his thing, was the fructose that's been added to our system or our food matrix beyond what we would normally experience if we were just getting it from something like fruit that may or may not have been seasonal, even if we had it, having it regularly, because it's packaged in a piece of fruit that's attached to other types of sugar and fibers, and you're not going to eat 6 apples, but you can squeeze 6 apples into a box of apple juice and get a liquid dose of it. So the poison is in the dose. sodas, obviously processed, as I mentioned, processed foods, juices, which are just like juices every day of this. It's almost similar sugar matrix or sugar makeup of a soda. Very similar.
Yep.
Not much different other than maybe it has a couple nutrients left in it, but it's still impacting our systems the same way. The other component that I think is probably even a bigger offender to our system is something that we've called good for us for 50, 60, 70 years. And that is a polyunsaturated oil. So I don't want to get too nerdy on you, but basically, it's the kind of fat that would be like in a nut, or it would be in, it's even in some fish. It's in most foods. It's even in most meat, but it isn't in high concentration. But what we've done, we started making these oils, these so-called vegetable oils, beginning with cottonseed oil, which was Crisco back in 1912. And then it's graduated into soybean oil, canola oil, safflower oil, all these oils that are made from these, what they call seeds or grains, that are very high in this omega-6 fatty acid. So most people are familiar with trying to balance out your omega-6 and your omega-3s, right?
Yep.
It's nearly impossible to do that in our current diet because there's so much omega-6. We only get that through our diet. And what we're doing is we're eating so much of it that this fatty acid that is primarily omega-6 fatty acid in our diet has become about 23% of the calories we digest as in the US.
Wow.
Just from that fatty acid alone, that omega-6 PUFA. So what has happened, they have a couple studies I've seen where we've watched the increase of the concentration of this fatty acid in our fat tissue, in our adipose tissue. From 1959, at 1959, it was about 9%, made up 9% of the fat we store in our bodies. 2008, it made up about 21.5% of the adipose tissue in our body. That was 14 years ago. So it's continued to increase as we eat more and more processed food, as that becomes more prevalent in it's used in all restaurants now. It's a lot of people don't realize they're eating it because they don't necessarily cook with Wesson oil anymore or Crisco. I use olive oil. I use avocado oil. It's already in the food you're buying. It's already in that salad dressing that says olive oil on it. If you flip it over and look at the label, nearly everything that comes in a box, a bag, or a bottle has one of these oils in it. The big one being soybean oil. Every restaurant you go to is using, let's say 99% of them. It's very rare to find one that isn't using one of these oils to cook with. It's very, very rare to find someone cooking with butter or tallow anymore. Or coconut oil. It doesn't happen. Whereas back in the 80s, you go to a movie theater and get popcorn, it was popped in coconut oil. As late as 1992, McDonald's was using tallow for the French fries, and now it's soybean oil. So these oils are like anywhere from, say, at the least 35% of this of their oil is made up of this linoleic acid, up to 70-something%. Whereas you look at tallow, which is beef fat, it's maybe 3%, butter 3% of the linoleic acid. That's a huge difference. And yet who's eating tallow anymore unless you're making a very concentrated effort to do that? We're told to stay away from butter. So it's pervasive in our diet. If you're eating out, you're eating it. If you're eating something out of a package of any kind with multiple ingredients, these oils are in it. And people say, well, we're told, we have the study saying this oil is good for us. I have 50 plus studies linking linoleic acid to disease of some sort, whether it's oxidized LDL, which causes heart disease, right? That's what builds up the plaque in your arteries is an oxidized LDL particle, right? Yeah. You can only oxidize. Saturated fat doesn't oxidize. It's saturated. It's stable. It's polyunsaturated fats that oxidize because they have the open double. I'm getting nerdy again, but that's why I have to know the mechanism. That's why I have to understand. Well, why would it do this? Because those polyunsaturated fats are more susceptible to oxidation. They're unsaturated. So they have open chains where oxygen can come in and basically like create rust for food. Linking it to obesity, linking it to metastasization of cancer, leading it to basically because the cells become mutated. The cell wall becomes mutated because it's not an animal fat; it's a plant fat, which polymerize the cell wall, and you have some distortion of the cell wall, and then you have. I mean, so it's just all of these separate studies that are linking disease to this linoleic acid. And because of the degree that's increased in our system over the last 110 years or so, we've now become much more susceptible to things that we used to eat all the time. And this is my opinion. Mm-hmm. This is my looking at it. Like, well, we used to always eat potatoes, and people made pies, and people lived on a farm. They ate bread, they ate corn, they ate starchy food. But suddenly now these foods are somehow causing us to become fat and sick, but they didn't 120 years ago. Well, why is that? Well, yeah, maybe we're using more sugar, but I think there's more to it than that. I think when we have this linoleic acid becoming more pervasive in our system, which is an inflammatory fat. It's meant to cause, Absolutely. We use it for inflammation, right? We use it for processes in our body that are meant to create, we have to have times of inflammation and then just like when you work out, you create inflammation and then your body comes in, your immune system comes in and calms things down. And that's how there's a lot of processes where we need the omega-6, but in a very small amount, in a single digit amount in our bodies, whether it could be, maybe it's 6 to 8% would be a normal amount to be storing in our body, not 23% or more now, because it's, it's been 14 years since that, a good 14 years since that study was done. So what we're seeing is that an inflammatory fat that is in studies directly linked both in human studies as well as mouse studies, but plenty of human studies showing an increase in heart disease. Even though it might lower cholesterol, we're seeing more oxidized LDL. We're seeing the outcomes of several studies that were done in the 60s and 70s where they kind of they didn't really put out the results of them. They saw more heart disease and more death from all-cause mortality by replacing saturated fat with things like margarine, corn oil, some of these very linoleic acid heavy polyunsaturated fats, as well as current studies that are linking directly with the chemistry of it to, like I said, obesity, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes. So those studies don't make the news. And it's not hard to understand why when
Amen.
The processed food companies are sponsors, are subsidizing our Nutrition Academy by at least 50, 60% of their funding. So when you have General Mills, Pepsi, Coke, Unilever, Mars, M&M, they're subsidized. They're the ones contributing enough money, not only to the USDA, but to our Nutrition Academy, which writes the education for our registered dietitians, as one who determines what they have to learn in order to graduate, and who play a big role in our food recommendations, U.S. guidelines, right?
Yep.
They're the ones who are and funding research for Harvard, for Tufts, for all these universities who are doing nutrition research, who are then making recommendations to the government, like we just saw this last week while we're recording this. They had a big meeting at the White House, and all of these academia and corporations are coming into the White House to give their opinion on what are, how they call it hunger, nutrition, health. And there is an aspect of it that is trying to get more food to rural areas where maybe people don't have access, but the agenda is the same. Let's reinforce more grains, more processed food, less egg, less meat, and more food that's been essentially fortified with these nutrients. And that's what they're basing their recommendations on, the fortifications into a processed food.
Absolutely.
That was a lot to unload at once. I'm sorry, but that's what flies around in my head. So
no, I am 100% with you. I love it. I believe it's necessary. And I think, you did touch upon a lot. I'll try to kind of unpack some of that. But, what first comes to my mind is you're right. There's just so many big corporations that are behind these recommendations. And the recommendations aren't based on health. They're based on what's going to give them the biggest bottom line.
Right.
So thankfully, I remain incredibly optimistic for conversations like this, that we can share this information with people for free that are just going to go on Instagram, YouTube, wherever we upload this, and share it with them. And the more of this kind of conversation that can get out there, initially some people might hear it and dismiss it, but all I challenge them to do is just try it. Try what we're talking about. Try to eliminate these industrial seed oils. Try to eliminate the monocrop culture that's loaded with glyphosate and chemicals that the farmers need to wear a hazmat suit to go out there and spray on this food.
Right.
How does that make any sense? We can spray a chemical on a food that the farmer needs to protect themselves from, but then we're supposed to be expected to consume that at no risk. Right. So that opens up the door for the conversation of what glyphosate and all those chemicals do to the gut microbiome and that whole thing. And we can get into that if you like in a moment. But the other thing that comes to mind is it's about these kinds of conversations continuing on a scale that in the fitness industry, the way I started this conversation and introduced today's conversation is there's so much information out there. And it's even within the industry, even with amongst the professionals, it's fighting back and forth over dogma, as opposed to let's just try to get as much information out there as we can to the mainstream, to the average individual. Let's stop confusing them, because what's winning right now is the commercialization. It's the corporations putting these cool looking characters in front of these children so that they eat these boxes of cereals and foods that are fortified. They say fortified with all these vitamins, which sounds great, but think about what has to happen to that food-like substance for any mineral that may have been previously existing to be stripped out to then necessitate fortification.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Let's get back to whole foods. Let's get back to giving the body the nutrients that it needs. And man, I do. So much of what we just discussed sounds just so dire and so sad. And the reality is it is. But I remain optimistic. I think we can get that information out there and help people.
Absolutely. Well, we can see the results. I mean, something's changed. Yep. We didn't used to look like this. We didn't used to all go to gyms and work out all the time. Yeah, a lot of people worked on a farm and they were moving throughout the day. But you can't really compare that to the number of people who are running 10, 15, 20 miles a week and going to the gym and lifting heavy weight and then doing diets and not having results. Something is wrong hormonally. Something is wrong chemically in their bodies.
Yep.
And when the chemistry is off, then you're going to be fighting your own body's drive to eat, and how it's storing fat and what it's doing with energy, to the point that you're not going to have the energy to do the things you need to do, but you are going to be hungry because it's affecting the way your blood sugar is being regulated. It's affecting the way the liver is responding to your pancreas as far as when to shut off and turn on blood sugar when insulin's being released. And so you have fat being generated when normally it would not, because the chemistry is off, because the hormones are off. And that can be like you said, glyphosate affecting the gut, and that can certainly impact the hormones as well as the oils, the excess sugar. It's multivariables. There are multivariables. If we can't say, oh, just get rid of this one thing. Well, life's not that simple. Yeah. Life's not that, and once you've got disease in place, it's really not that simple. You might have to, in order to turn the ship around, you may need to cut back on things that you normally wouldn't if you were already metabolically healthy and you're just trying to eliminate these things. Once you get to maintenance level and hopefully your body heals, you can maybe let off on the gas a bit. But there is a definite change has to take place. And it's as simple, as you put it, as eating whole food. Whereas processed food is a minimal part, rarely a part of your diet. And if you're eating even a balanced whole food diet, I mean, I've been a proponent of low carb diets for a long time, over 20 years. And I've been fasting myself and talking to people about intermittent fasting, using that as a tool to reverse obesity or, and insulin resistance for 10 plus years. I started fasting probably 2010. And so, because I play with it, I don't want to ask somebody to do something that I haven't done or haven't experimented with.
Same.
But that doesn't mean that they were originally eating too much. It doesn't mean that some of these foods that they're going to have to cut back in are in and of themselves bad. But there's an element that is in our diet that is bad, that doesn't belong there. And it can take some time to come out of your system. It can take some time for your body to heal. And speaking to a nutritionist recently, I've learned that it can take the half-life of these oils in our body is about 680 days. 2 years for a half-life. So if you're at 22% of your fat tissue is these oils, it takes 2 years of not consuming them to get down to 11-ish, give or take, and then it might take another couple years to get down to where it's like in the single digits or close to, or like, 6, 5, 6, which would be amazing if you didn't ever consume them again. Well, we're all consuming them. I mean, even if you eat something like nuts, and you're going to have some element of omega-6 come in your body, where it's in small amounts, it's still part of a whole food diet. So when you and I have worked with people, I'm sure you've seen this, it's not always a quick fix when they change their diet. They're not always seeing results in 6 weeks or 6 months. Sometimes it can take a couple years for their body to really start healing and turn something around where it's like solid. Where isn't like they go on vacation, all of a sudden they blow up again, or they let off the gas a little bit and suddenly the weight loss comes to a screeching halt. Because the body's not healed yet. They still have these inflammatory processes going on in their body that are affecting the way their body's responding to food and creating energy. It's not a light switch. And so once it's in your body, you've got to be really focused on letting it come out and letting your body heal. And we don't live in a patient society like that anymore.
Right.
And
they want quick pill.
Quick pill.
Quick fix with the pill.
Fixes sold everywhere. You know what I mean? And they look so easy. It's a different mindset than we're used to having for something, quick. I mean, even with technology, things are quicker. Everything's quicker. But we need to understand we've taken these things into our bodies, and we've made changes hormonally as well as in composition. In the way our body fat is composed, it has something that was supposed to be in small amounts now in large amounts, and it only came in through our diet. And that can take some time to extract. Discipline, and really the best way to do it is whole food. It's a whole food diet, and like you said, the camps of dietary camps in fighting. I mean, there are some basic principles that I would say, avoid that, or that's probably not going to take you in the right direction. But in general, if you're eating whole food and it's even somewhat balanced, where it's not like, it doesn't need to be low carb. And believe me, I preached low carb for a long time. It doesn't have to be healthy. It might have to go there to reverse something. But if you're eating whole food, eventually that stuff's going to come out of your body. It just may take a little longer for you to get there. But the infighting is silly over dogma when the real enemy should be clear. It's not who's animal-based, who's carnivore, who's keto, it's the processed food. It's processed grains, the processed oils, and the excess sugar being added. Those three factors are what's driving disease. And that's the clear enemy. And the people who are designing these foods to trigger our taste buds, to trigger our dopamine in such a way, they know exactly what they're doing. They're even to the point that they're putting different flavor levels in the Doritos so that you get a
You took
spicy
the words
one.
out of my mouth.
Yes, they took the spicy ones, and then a couple dull ones, and then you're looking for the next spicy one. It's like a drug addict.
Yep.
Like, where's my next good hit? Spicy. Wait, dull, dull, dull. Spicy. Oh, wait. Brain is going like looking for the reward.
Yeah.
They know
That's
exactly what they're doing. It's and the bliss point in the sodas and the sweet foods, where they know exactly how sweet to be, not to overpower you, but just enough to keep you going back for more. You're fighting instinct at that point. You're fighting your hormones, and and if you don't realize it, you're not going to win. So,
amen.
It's like you can't let it in. You've got to, you go back to whole food, and it may take a while to adjust to those flavors, to normal flavors, to savory flavors, to things that aren't as sweet, to things you actually have to chew, to things that take time to digest and don't just fly right through you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That ribeye is going to sit in your stomach for a little bit. But you're going to
be delicious.
Yes, but you're going to be soaking up the nutrients of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You're going to be soaking up those nutrients and putting them to work for you. But it may take you longer to digest than your bowl, your little rice bowl. And so you can have some rice, but don't make that your dinner. You know what I mean? You need nutrient-dense food, and grains are meant to they add energy. There's not a lot of micronutrients in those. And so we need to be looking at what are the most nutrient-dense foods and the least inflammatory foods. And if you start looking at your food in that way, and what is it? And single ingredient. Rule number 1, single ingredient. 2, where's the nutrient density, micronutrient density that I need, and where are the ones that are the least inflammatory, and which ones are just filler, the things we use to fill starving bellies. Well, most of us don't have to live like that. In the United States, for sure, in the Western world, we're not trying to fill starving bellies. We've got abundance of food, and we have abundance of energy hanging off of us in many cases.
Yeah,
that we need to tap into. And so, eating in such a way that allows us to tap into that energy, but gives us the micronutrients we need to be healthy and start letting our body heal. That's the lens we need looking at our food through.
I love it. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind here. You've talked about the omega-6s versus omega-3s. I recall hearing that I believe the average is currently we're consuming a ratio of 20-1.
Yeah.
20 of the pro-inflammatory omega-6s to only 1 of the anti-inflammatory omega-3s, whereas our ancestors were a 1-to-1 ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some extremes of cases of 60-1 happening right now. I mean, it's terrifying. Like you said, it's in everything. You look at any package, you're going to see it in there somewhere. Palm oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, some sort of added oil that adds zero nutritional value, just adds in some component of inflammatory response. Yeah. And it really, outside of the companies making money off of it, it just doesn't belong in there, and it's really terrifying. There was a podcast I listened to a while back. I think it was with Dr. Paul Saladino. Right. It was really through the peak of COVID. There was a healthy weight individual who I don't recall if he passed away or if he just got very sick, but they did a biopsy of his fat. And even though he was of a very lean, I think he was low double digit or even single digit body fat, the ratio that he had of his composition of body fat, the amount of omega-6 that was in there was just astonishing for somebody that was of a healthy weight and healthy body fat percentage. To your point, that half-life, who knows when he lost the weight, who knows when he got, quote unquote, into shape. And maybe he really just from the outside looked really good, but maybe internally was still dealing with a lot of that inflammation, Right. So it's really scary to think about those things, that even for somebody who looks healthy and is active and fit, if we're not thinking about these things, it can really take its toll and do some damage.
For sure.
Now, is there anything you know of? I know we'll get a little more into this later with supplementation and stuff, but is there, outside of the obvious changes we just discussed, is there a supplementation approach? Is there something that we can do to speed up the removal, if you will, of this excess omega-6s?
I've heard people suggest things that I wouldn't say that, yeah, that'll work. You know what I mean? After people say,
Mhm.
I've heard you can eat this and it'll help. So I think, I can't imagine being able to, I mean, we have so-called fat burners being sold to help people burn more fat, and the incremental amount that it actually affects of fat burning. I mean, if you're doing everything right, maybe it'll add a couple extra percentage, of increase, but, your body is going to burn off fat at a rate that, based on what you're eating and what you're working off. It's not like there's no magic pill or chemical that's going to speed that up in general.
Yep.
There might be some accelerants, but for the most part, you're talking about turning over the type of fat that you're storing. Mm-hmm. Your best approach is to not put it in, or to put in as little as possible, so that as your body continues to replace fat, which is going to do, or burn off fat, you're not replacing those oils. I don't care it's like eating the spider to catch the fly. Yeah. Honestly, don't eat the fly. Yeah. Don't, it's just, to me, it's that simple. Sure. Eliminate the processed foods and let your body heal, and then cleanse. Your body can cleanse itself very effectively if you're not getting in the way. The problem is we're getting in our own way. We're getting in our body's way. We keep putting the toxin in. And I hope they don't find something that speeds that up, because people will use it like a magic bullet. Well, it's okay. I'll have this XYZ food because I'll just take more of this, or I'll just take this instead. Yeah. We're talking about an abundance of going in, and whatever that supplement is, the effectiveness of it is going to be that much, if it's even effective at all.
Sadly, you're 100% right too. I mean, you think about it with insulin. People that you're talking type 2 diabetes, you're talking the reason there's a blood sugar problem is because of the foods that you're putting in your body, and then the insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance and such. But, I have a client that told me a story of his brother that he would sit there and say, well, I'm having this dessert, so I need another shot. Oh, it's like, man, that's not what that's intended for.
No, but that's common. And the nutritionists will tell them that. That's what's scary. The RDs will say, no, you got to eat this. You got to make sure you take a little extra. It's like, how about we don't eat that? How about we don't prescribe insulin to allow for more food that they don't need to be taking when they're sick? The goal should be getting people off of insulin. Not, do you want to reverse disease or manage disease? Do you want to manage a continuation of disease? Well, then keep doing that. If you want to change it, reverse it, add some years to your life and make them more, enjoyable. Try reversing your disease. It's a lot harder, but it's worth it. I mean, it's just, you can't, why would you want to continue to feed the disease once you understood what's causing it?
Amen.
But yet we have a huge population of people that do. And it's justified by the medical industry.
Without question. And that's it. I mean, the bottom line is it isn't about health. It's about money, and for me, it's more about health. I want to see my fellow man be able to learn the information to implement, to become healthy, and to become, strong, able-bodied, take back the quality of life. You're thinking it's literally like an alcoholic whose symptoms go away when they have the next drink. If somebody's addicted to sugar and they start getting hangry and they have that meal, the symptoms go away. So they think all they needed to do was eat another meal. But no, the problem is you have this addiction to this food source. And I don't even like to call sugar a food source, because it's so much of a drug. There's just so many bad things that come from it. But, again, rather than continuing down the list too deep in terms of the problems, we'll start talking more about solutions. Right. And one thing that comes to mind, this story absolutely blows my mind. I think it was back in the 60s. I'm sure you've heard this story, but Angus Barberi still to this day has the world record for the longest fast. Now, this was supervised by doctors. It was over a year. He was, I think, 450 pounds when he started. He was 180 when it was all said and done. And the kicker was, thanks to autophagy, he didn't have loose, saggy skin. He didn't need a tummy tuck or anything. His body was able to utilize all that stored energy that was stored in the form of body fat. This was a water-only diet, and the doctors made sure that he had his electrolytes. He didn't lose his minerals and nutrients that he needed from that capacity. But it just goes to show what body fat really can do for us. The average thing you hear is that the human body can go X amount of days without food and certain amount of time without water and so on and so forth. But the reality is, as you said, closing in on 45% currently obesity, many, many people can go a very long time without consuming more food because we have the stored energy there. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending that people just stop eating altogether. The reality is, man, I love to eat. I love food. I incorporate fasting into my day. And I think a lot of this, it falls into the dogma stuff too, that many people talk about the results that they've had. So the average person says, well, wait, if it worked for them, I'll try it. And they now believe that they cannot eat until noon or later, and they have to stop eating at a certain time in the evening. The reality is, if you currently are eating like the average between 14 and 16 hours a day, well, let's cut it back a half an hour on either end to start.
You're right.
Right? Let's do that for 30 to 45 days. And if that's feeling pretty good and you're seeing some results, let's cut off another half an hour on either end. Let's slowly pull it in, right? This isn't going from eating all the processed foods that you're eating and eating all day long to overnight change it, because you're not going to stick with that.
Right. That's sustainable. Yeah.
Exactly. And that brings me to one of my pillars. I'm curious how much you get into this, is mindset. Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about this a lot, and I've been a total student of his for a while now, that we are only in our conscious thinking mind 5% of the time, which means we're working on our subconscious 95% of the time. And that's all programs that were established between birth and 7.
Wow.
So parents, family members, the people that were around and that influence us, they establish our subconscious programming, and then we just fall into it. So you often hear, well, being overweight runs in my family, the diabetes runs in my family, these types of things run in my family. And the question really is, at that point, is it the disease that runs in your family, or is it the lifestyle that generates the disease? Is it the lifestyle that is the epigenetics that reads the blueprint that is the genetics of certain diseases, right? As he says, is there isn't a gene for this disease and that disease that means you automatically get it. It's what is triggering that,
Right.
So from that mindset perspective, I will go back to that pillar for a moment. Is that something you get into with your clients? You get into how they're thinking about things and whether or not they believe they can do it?
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, start with small changes to begin with. Start with, it's like, what can we handle? Let's change one or two things to start. That's sustainable. And once you get that down, then we'll layer in some more change. But I usually try to also encourage them not to merely look to the scale as a meter of success, or even expect clothes changing. That's great, but really focus on habit changes. If your waist is shrinking and the scale's not moving, that's really, well, look, your waist is shrinking, you're losing fat in the right place, it's just composition. But what really needs to get someone started is focus on habit changes, not immediate results or visible results. It's like, let's start changing habits, and then your health will follow your habits. That's what I tell them. So let's focus. We change some habits and we'll layer in some more changes. You feel like that is becoming a new normal for you. And then a little more. And at some point, your lifestyle will change over time, and then your health will follow. But you didn't get here overnight. We're not going to change it overnight. And we want to make sure we don't change so much, like you said, that it's not sustainable and you become overwhelmed. Let's stick to some basic principles of, let's try to get to eating only 3 times a day in a 12-hour period, like you said. And maybe, let's look at whole food. That'd be huge. If we get everybody to eat 3 meals a day of whole food within a 12-hour period, we'd go back to the 1950s, essentially. And it's like of just normal food, whole food, a little bit of everything on your plate. We're back in the 1950s. When people came, they had breakfast, they went to work, they stopped for lunch, they came home, they had dinner, they were done eating. And it was really simple. And most of what they ate was cooked from home. And so, or they took something from home in their lunch. It's that simple.
It sure is.
It's that simple.
And it's powerful too, because having made those changes, and as I said, I use intermittent fasting myself.
Mm-hmm.
What we tend to find when we eliminate the processed foods and when we cut down the amount of meals, I mean, at this point, my average day is only 1 to 2 meals, to be honest.
Yeah.
There are some days that I'll have a third meal, but what winds up happening is you aren't hungry.
No.
Your body is nourished. You're putting in the nutrients that it needs. So the issue we run into is we are so overfed and undernourished that people literally are afraid, well, if I have to go on this 2-hour drive and then I have a meeting to sit in, I'm going to be really hungry. I need to bring something with me. I need to plan for that. And it's a snack. It's quick. It's convenient.
Yeah.
And the problem is that just perpetuates the problem. So you're spot on. And I couldn't agree more. And I want so badly. The reason I have this channel, the reason I'm having these conversations is because I've benefited from making these changes. I feel incredible. And I want to share that with everybody. I want them to feel just as good. So when you get to that point, you eliminate the processed foods, you change your taste buds. Now you give me a cookie, a cake, something like that. It's far too sweet.
Yeah.
A piece of fruit is sweet enough, is satisfying. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I don't have a sweet tooth anymore. And then I am more apt to go a 24-hour fast than I am to worry about where's my next meal.
Right.
You know, you correct your metabolism,
right.
And it's so powerful.
Yeah, but just and you know this. If you say it to somebody right out of the gate, you'd scare the crap out of them. I mean, literally, sure. They would go, "What?" I mean, I've seen the look in their eyes a couple of times when I mentioned just going till noon without eating, and the eyes get big and the fear, and you can see them immediately go into their head, thinking, "I don't know if I can do that. I can't do that. How do I do that? I can't get to 10 o'clock without eating something." And so that's when you step in, like, okay, let's try breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that's it, no snacks. And then it's like, okay, 2 days. Let's try 2 days, push breakfast back to 10, or try to, if you think you can go all the way to lunch those 2 days, let's do that 2 days of intermittent fasting and step that in, where the other 3 days you're doing your 3 meals like you have been for the last month. So it's a stair step, whereas you and I are a little bit freakish, and we're okay with taking on challenges like that. And we're curious about it. We experiment on ourselves. And it's great when someone is willing to take that on and do intermittent fasting. I have plenty of clients who have not only moved to the 8-hour fasting schedule, 8-hour eating window, and 16 hours of fast, but they also will do 1 or 2 days a week of a dinner fast or 24-hour fast to push the machines forward as they start to stick, or as they've lost. But sometimes that's after they've lost 20, 30 pounds and they've changed their habits. And they've become more adapted to going longer periods without eating. They're burning fat more efficiently. Hormones have balanced out a little bit. And it takes a while to get there. It's just, I mean, I definitely still do, and I'm as lean as I need to be, but I still do a 24-hour fast once a week out of just discipline and just food discipline for it. And it's like a workout for my fat burning, for my metabolism. It's metabolic stress. And so I consider that almost like as a component of like I would my workout, like that's something I do to keep those hormones in line. Then I have several other days where it's an 8 or 9 hour window. And then I have a tendency, especially at my age, I've noticed I can over index some of that stuff. I can overdo low carb, if I'm not eating much carb, I'm working out a lot and I'm doing a lot of fasting. At this point in my life, I can get to a sense of overtrain very easily, where it starts disturbing my sleep. If I took my blood work, my thyroid, my TSH would be kind of high. So it wouldn't be a high thyroid. It would be the hormone that stimulates the thyroid is working too hard. There's other things that would come up in blood work that would show there's too much stress. So I start over indexing the stressors as, someone who pushes themselves in that way can, because I've adapted to it, because I would have to tell myself, no, I need to eat another meal. Like you, I don't get hungry. And so, you get to a point where your body's, you feel it. Like you can start to, the feel of it is it becomes like a flow, like, okay, on this day, and it works around your schedule. It's not so much a regimen or like, I have to do this now. It's how is my diet and exercise going to fit in with the things I need to accomplish today with my activity level? And you get a flow of what is necessary for your body once it's healthy. And when you do eat one of those unhealthy things, not only does it taste sweet, but you can't digest it. Like my stomach won't tolerate it. It's like the bloat. I feel terrible for a couple of days. And again, some of that's age. It's just being at 51. And then some of that is just getting used to whole food. And when those toxins come into my body, the inflammation that I'm not used to having is, it's like in my gut immediately. And then it's achy. It's maybe I don't sleep so well. I don't adjust it so well. So I become more sensitive to it. And you have to develop that. You develop that sensitivity to it. Whereas when you're constantly putting in your body, you don't know any different.
Yeah.
Same with alcohol. Like if you're used to drinking every day, a couple of drinks, well, you're desensitized to the effect of it. If you don't drink for a month and you have one or two drinks, you notice it right away, and you notice it the next day right away. It's like fuzzy, foggy, puffy eyes. It's the same thing with the processed food. You're taking in a toxin that at some point you're not used to anymore, and your body, and it triggers it like, hey, we don't like this. We need to get rid of this. We need to get this out. We're really inflamed. And so it is a change of you're changing your whole system, and that takes time. But you do, to get back to your original point, it has to be a gradual move into that, because people have become addicted to that. It's a mindset of fear that if I don't eat every 3 hours, I'm going to get hungry and lightheaded. And they might get lightheaded. They might have a little hypoglycemia because that's what their system has created. That's what their system's used to. And they will have to change the way their system works to start burning fat in those times. You're right. To have more stable blood sugar. It's a process. It's a physical process. But there's definitely a psychological dependency on having something every so often, like you said, and becomes an emotional crutch.
For sure. Yeah, there's a physical addiction component, an emotional addiction component for sure. And, as you said, when I was describing where I'm at now, you're absolutely right. The average person, you tell them that, I don't expect them to make those changes right overnight. That's just crazy.
They might run away.
Exactly right. Like, don't even ask me to do that. I'm out of here. Exactly.
Yeah.
What I tend to find is that type of person actually does a little bit better rather than trying to go right into fasting. That's just irrational. They keep their breakfast at their normal breakfast time, but go a little more of a keto route. Make sure they're getting their protein in, a little higher fat, preferably even just eliminate those carbs. Now they're more sustained. They feel satiated a little bit longer.
For sure.
And that's the type of change that we can make early on. And as you said, kind of take the steps into it,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that reminds me, so that meeting they're having at the White House, that's basically going to be looking at creating new food policy. So basically we're going to have a whole new, the last one led to the food pyramid. That was in 1969, 70, and then we got the food pyramid about 7 or 8 years later. This is the biggest meeting of this kind for 50 years. And the guy who's co-chairing it is a guy from Tufts, is an academia, PhD from Tufts University, who's well funded in his research by people that we don't have to go into now, but basically, Gates and all the processed food companies and Rockefeller, and his recommendation that he created this food compass. It's called the Food Compass, I guess, to help us find our way, right? And someone did a study on this food compass that he's come up with, this program, and it basically put on the recommended food list things like frosted mini wheats. Wow. And the to be limited was Lucky Charms and ice cream cone with nuts and M&Ms, almond M&Ms were to be kind of managed. To be avoided, an egg cooked in butter and hamburger. So when we have processed cereals, kids cereals ranking higher in this food compass
Wow.
than an egg cooked in butter and hamburger, just plain hamburger, not a hamburger with a bun and fries and ketchup and no, hamburger meat.
Wow.
Is ranked to be avoided. What are we telling kids, telling nutritionists, that's going to affect schools, hospitals, military. Yeah. Those are the people they make the food recommendations and the diet and the menus for our institutions where our kids are going to school, where we our families in the hospital. That's the food they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
These are the recommendations.
Therein lies the reason.
They're the recommendations we're going to be getting. And this guy's the co-chair. He's the co-chair of this. So we're basically, his compass it will likely become food policy. This report should be coming out, if not today, by the beginning of next week. They just met 2 days ago, yesterday and the day before, and it's probably going to be we're getting the food pyramid just restructured, right?
Yeah.
It's just the same garbage, in a different package.
Yeah, they want to show that they're putting in effort, they're making changes, and now we're going to funnel the money in a different direction is all. It's certainly not going towards true health and wellness, and that's terrifying, But again, I'll go back to the optimism. I'll go back towards the solutions based as opposed to the problems, which that is a massive problem, and it's terrifying to me that in 2022 we're still dealing with that, with the amount of information that's out there. But these kinds of conversations is exactly how we're going to start to combat that.
Right. It's a grassroots movement. That's an advantage we have now that we didn't have in the 70s and 80s.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this technology that allows this.
Right. That's what I mean.
Here I am. I'm in New York. You're in Nashville. And we're able to have this conversation and share this with everybody that is going to see our platforms, So.
Right. And build community.
God bless.
We can build community around that where we can have our own conversations. We can bring attention to regenerative agriculture, to where, there's a new way of raising food and creating food that has more nutrient dense food and more nutrients and carbon in the soil as well. So that our food that we produce is more nutritious. And going back to local food, local farms, traditional farming that's being done in a smarter, more strategic way, so it can produce more for the amount of people we have now. But there's, a lot of people discount regenerative agriculture as if it couldn't produce enough food. Yet there are regenerative farms that are producing 10 to 15 times more than their grandparents did because they've learned how to things like mob grazing, and where they're moving the cattle and then another animal behind it, and then they're putting crops on it, and then they're letting they're not crops so much, but like fruit trees, right?
Sure.
And healthy vegetables. And then the animals come through and they regenerate the soil with all the things that animals do, like eating the grass and manure and everything else. So it's the natural cycle. It's the original way the farms would work, but done in a more strategic way so they can actually produce more. And those, in my opinion, those are the people we need to be subsidizing.
100%.
Not the soy, corn, and wheat crops, which are getting the majority of our subsidization, to the point that the government subsidies since the 70s, right? To the point that we are able to sell those crops for less than they actually cost to produce them because of the amount of subsidies, to the point we're exporting them. We're exporting them to other countries, like, for instance, Africa, where we can sell their grain to them, sell the soy to them cheaper than what a local farmer there can actually produce it for. So we're undercutting the local farmer in those countries because we're spending tax dollars to make these crops work and to produce more than we really need.
Yeah. And what's crazy about that is the monocrop culture is actually depleting the soil of nutrients, creating just dirt where it's no longer soil. And as you said, we can actually sequester more carbon in the soil if we put the nutrients back in there, if we create a healthier microbiome of the soil, which is what regenerative ag does. And I'm thrilled you brought that up. I'm really looking forward to it. I have a guest coming on soon. I found a local regenerative ag farm near me. That's where I get my cow. And I'm so blessed with that. I share that name all the time with people around me. It's for anyone that's local here, it's Mitten Rock Farm in LaGrange, New York. Unbelievable. And I'm really looking forward to bringing that to everybody around here.
Awesome.
And Zane, unfortunately, man, I could keep going for hours, but my phone's telling me I've got 10% battery life left. I'm kicking myself. I've got it plugged in. I guess this adapter's not working for me. So before we just get disconnected, I'll say, before my last question, where can people find you?
I'm most active on Instagram, actually. It's at Zane Griggs Fitness. If you're not on Instagram, I do have a Facebook page. I post things there as well. It's just my name, Zane Griggs. But and then I post on YouTube at Zane Griggs as well. Some, but most active on Instagram at Zane Griggs Fitness. Yeah.
Awesome. And I do know you've got your own podcast out, right? Hunger, Hunt, and Feast?
Hunger, Hunt, Feast. Yeah, that's the podcast. Yeah. I'm actually, funny you bring that up. I don't know if you've seen some of my recent stuff where I'm going talking about Healthy AF, which Healthy AF.
Yes, sir.
And it's got a double meaning, obviously, but the AF is really when I'm talking about is healthy after 50. Yep. And so being that I crossed that little boundary there, a little border of 50. So I'm actually in the next month or so rebranding the podcast into the Healthy AF podcast. And so It's going to have it just seemed to be a message that was resonating better. And I'm always willing to listen to people who are getting the feedback, and it's like, well, let's go that direction. So it's going to be the Healthy AF podcast starting probably before the end of the year. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I look forward to it. Well, I tell you, we're definitely, unfortunately, cutting it short. We have so much more I know we could go over. Oh my gosh, so we'll have to do this again and continue it.
Let me know.
We'll be in touch. And for everyone listening, guys, if you like this content, stick around, subscribe to the channel. Follow, like, comment, review, all that good stuff, depending on where you're watching it. If I don't say that stuff, I get yelled at by my producer. And if you want to support the channel, one of the things you can do for me is go over to jhartfitness.com. We have a shop there set up. So there's some gear you can get there, like this here. I like that mindset plan. I hear the dirty word can't from people all the time. So I like to say, yes, you can. Change that mindset. Get out there and get it done. So, hopefully we'll do this again soon, Zane. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was fantastic. And everyone, thanks for being here. And as I like to tell you, you are capable, you are worthy, and much love to you all.